thanks for joining us on the virtual Propane Expo.
Bill, thank you very much. Thanks, everybody. I appreciate you being here. Bill said, my name is Stuart Flatow. I was the Vice President of Safety and Training at PERC for about 19 years. A lot of you know me. Some of you actually admit that you know me. I've really been very thrilled to be part of the virtual Propane Expo as one of their board members, if you will. As a matter of fact, if you look at this month's BPN, there's a huge spread about virtual Propane Expo. You know, I want to start off talking about something that has nothing to do with the topic, and that's about how crazy things could be. I'm looking at the BPN magazine, and there's an article about Massachusetts court sends cat claim to jury. That in the usual decision, a Massachusetts federal court recently ruled that a jury can consider a claim that a cat activated the burner control on a gas range, causing a fire to be burned down. Byron Breida of Pegain, I know you're there, so perhaps only in Massachusetts these things could happen. And the claim was the cat turned the damn knob on. And so I guess they're going to send the cat to the electric chair. Pretty crazy world we live in, right? All right, speaking about crazy things, static electricity in the propane industry, there's good news and bad news. The good news is that incidents involving static electricity don't happen that often. The bad news is when they do, they can be catastrophic, but the good news, once again, is ameliorating or reducing those risks is not very difficult, not very expensive. The book that you see on this screen, Static Electricity in the Propane Industry, was one that I was fortunate enough to be part of and manage the delivery in about 2008. The presentation is going to follow many things that we've learned in that book, and I've got to give props to a gentleman, Ron Zazulka, who is the static electricity or static discharge consultant that worked on this, and Ed Ferguson from AmeriGas Propane. Ed is now with C3H8 Consulting. Now, to give you some background on the genesis of this material, AmeriGas Propane, and we'll talk about a little bit later, had some real instances, some real issues with static electricity. They had one of their plants blow up. And they retained the services of this gentleman, Ron Zazulka, externally, and internally, Ed Ferguson. They did a bunch of testing, they wrote reports, and they came up with some really fantastic data and recommendations. And at that time, the then CEO, Gene Bissell, he thought, we cannot keep this secret. We have to give this information and our experience to the propane industry. And the whole industry really should be very grateful for that generosity, and it was very generous. So the presentation is going to be based on the materials in this book, and I just kind of condensed it to make it a little bit easier to understand. The whole science between static discharge and throwing static sparks can be pretty daunting, and we're not going to get too deep into it. But what we are going to do is talk about some of the issues. And, you know, picture tells 1,000 words. This was in Spain, and there are a number of these gas station incidents where you can see this gentleman is filling this container. I don't know if that's a plastic line, the bottom on the truck or not. And this is his daughter here, right next to it. Okay, so let's see what happens in pretty short order. Right, he's filling it, she's touching it, and so look at that. Reported the girl jumped out of the truck, she was fine, but here he is, nozzle's inside, she's, for whatever reason, she's touching the container, and it was theorized that her clothing actually threw that spark. So what are we going to talk about today? So today we're going to talk about what is static electricity and how does it occur? Can static electricity ignite propane? Well, I'm going to say the answer is yes, otherwise we wouldn't be having this conversation. How does temperature and relative humidity affect the level of static electricity? Can it be eliminated? Can we actually eliminate static electricity in our lives? And what's really important is how to reduce exposure to static discharge in your filling. When we talk about static discharge, we're talking about throwing a spark. Prevention through training and auditing. I'm also going to show some film clips that we developed through the making of the program to help bring the notion of static discharge, how you can handle it, how you can control things to life. As most things, the benefits of training are manyfold. You want to protect your employees and customers. incident prevention. And your employees become safety partners, right? Involve people in the training. They're the ones that are going to be doing the work. They're the ones that are in the workplace. They're the ones that you want to be part of the solution. You definitely want to protect assets. We want to protect life, but we want to protect assets also, whether they're company assets or they're someone else's assets. And maybe you get to lower insurance and operating costs. You should be able to lower operating costs when you have less incidents because it'll cost less to operate. And if your insurance companies are nice to you, they may even throw you a bone. Can a spark from static electricity ignite propane? Right? Well, probably, obviously it can, or else you wouldn't be here. If you look at the lower right-hand part of the slide, you see the fire triangle. We all know what that is. We need heat, we need fuel, we need oxygen. We need all those things in the proper proportions to have an ignition. Okay? Now, just take this at face value. At 3,000 volts, a static spark can deliver about 0.50 millijoules of energy. Millijoules is the unit of measure, such as calories are a unit of measure. Millijoules are a unit of measure that we use to measure the amount of energy that can be processed through a static spark. We know that the sweet spot of propane, the lower explosive limit between 2.15 to 9.60 propane mixed with air, is the sweet spot that can support combustion. That's the danger zone. But that will ignite with about 0.25 to 0.30 millijoules of energy. 3,000 volts, 0.50. We ignite with 0.25 to 30 millijoules of energy. So we're looking at about 1,500 to 2,000 volts of energy generated to throw a spark, the spark being the heat, can mix with energy and ignite propane. Now, we know all that. 3,000 volts, 0.50 millijoules, 0.25 to 30 will ignite. 3,000 volts is the smallest static spark a person can see, hear, or feel. 3,000 volts, 0.50 millijoules. So we can actually have a static discharge incident and not see it. Right? We can have that spark being there and we don't even feel it. We could ignite propane with a charge of a static spark that we can't even feel or hear. And that's important. I'll get into why that's important in a little bit. Our friends at AmeriGas, again, incredibly generous. This was around 2007 in Willoughby, Ohio. There was an incident where a third party were delivering cylinders. They were filled, they were plastic wrapped. Cylinders were stacked onto a pallet, secured with stretch wrap. Employees started to remove that wrap. Unfortunately, one of the valves was leaking. And as they removed the plastic wrap, they created a static spark or discharge, literally burned the whole plant down. Fortunately, no one was killed. The employee had some minor injuries, but the plant was devastated. That led AmeriGas leadership to say, we need to look into what happened here. You know, normally when you do a fire inspection, they can't find anything wrong, nothing obvious. A lot of times people will say, maybe it must have been static discharge. Can't find anything else. This was the issue here. And so in a propane AmeriGas facility in Yuba City, California, what happened was plant manager reported a possible fire in the filling area. Plant manager kind of saw something very briefly out of the corner of his eye in his peripheral vision. Some employees reported hearing a pop sound, seeing really bright flashes, but quickly, really quick, like something you might see out of the corner of your eye. They thought it was reflections from passing vehicles. Nobody saw any fire, no investigation that there was a fire. So what could it be? Well, who knows? So they put a surveillance camera outside the filling area. This was a cylinder filling station, and the camera caught the moment that gas release from the service valve was ignited by a static spark. Spark was given off by the employee's clothing, and here's the picture. This is a 1 in a million chance to catch this. There it is. There's the ignition right here. It happens in a millisecond. The employee was wearing like nylon, like sweatpants. You know, nylon, like wool, kind of snap, crackles, and pops. That was the ignition source. That was what caused the ignition. But it happened very fast. Unfortunately, it didn't do anything. That told AmeriGas management, we need to do something more here. We need to really investigate what's happening in our plants as it applies to static discharge, static electricity. We'll get into some of that. So how is static electricity generated? Lightning, friction, or a very fancy word, tribogeneration, and we all know what that is. Two materials touch and then separate. And what happens is, and here's where it can get very, very technical, you're actually moving, you're taking electrons from one piece of material to the other. And that creates that charge. And humans could carry that charge and throw that spark when the time is right. Most common things, right? Walk across the carpet, touch a light switch, take a wool sweater off. We become energized and we can throw a spark. Fuel flowing, which can generate enough energy to ignite fuels, right? Common example, transfer, right? Where do we see that? Transfer of methanol, gasoline, propane. That friction of fuels going at very fast velocity through a small opening, right, can cause that generation of static electricity. And that's why we use grounding wires and bonding. We want to make sure that any static spark generated goes to ground. That's why we want to do all those things. Let's talk a little about conductors and non-conductors. We've heard that. Now, this is a conductible material. A conductor is any material that allows the flow of electrons, like most metals, like the human body. We walk across the carpet, we touch something, we become energized. The energy is allowed to pass through us, and we can create a spark upon touching something, as well as, and if there's fuel in that area capable of supporting ignition, that's when we have an issue. Non-conductors, dry concrete, plastics, vinyl, dry fabrics, they could generate the static electricity, but it won't flow through them. I'll give you some examples as we go through. Let's look at some things at a plant. Where do we get friction? Where could friction be at a propane plant that when the circumstances are right, somebody touches it, they could throw a spark, removing stretch wraps, removing cylinder wraps from sleeves. And all that could cause static electricity. Taking off or putting off clothing in a controlled area. We'll talk about controlled areas in a bit. Those are areas that can produce the transfer of propane, that can produce a spark. Improper clothing like nylon or microfibers. You saw the picture earlier of that gentleman who was wearing nylon clothing. There was a little bit of gas escaping through the carousel. The nylon fiber created the situation of a spark, and under the right circumstances, we could have had a significant issue. Let's take a little bit of a video, bring that to life about sources of static electricity in a propane plant.
Possible sources of static electricity are all around us. Dry wind blowing over cellophane stretch wraps. Plastic sleeves being removed from barbecue cylinders.
All right, they generate static, but it's a matter of controlling that generation of static. So again, can a spark from static electricity ignite propane? I say this again because this is pretty basic. When we look at this, we look at a spark can deliver based upon how many volts a static spark can deliver, the amount of energy, what that energy is needed to ignite propane. So what AmeriGas did is they hired Ron Zizalko, and they did some research. They went to a number of their plants, not only those that had carousels over them, but they measured the amount of volts that could be generated from various sources within a propane facility. Just stretch wrap, right? Wind blowing over stretch wrap could generate over 10,000 volts, right? Which can generate enough millijoules, enough energy when the situation is right to ignite propane. Plastic covers, stacking trays, tank collars, all these plastic things. They're benign by themselves, but when there's friction over these things, friction in the context of wind blowing over them, they generate energy. They generate energy in the form of voltage, which generates energy in the form of millijoules, which can ignite propane given the right circumstance. Packing materials that we see wrap around vertical cylinders, PVC piping, pails, sunshades. You ever stand under these sunshades and you feel the hair standing up? Or if you've ever had children, you buy these little plastic to run through, you see the hairs kind of standing up on edge. That's what we're talking about here. The difference here is that the static, where the voltage is generated, is also areas where we have fuel sources that in the right conditions can cause an ignition. Humidity plays a huge role in static electricity. Right? If you just think about it, if you take a brush, you got nice, luxurious hair, like me and Bill have, and you put your brush through that, you might feel some of that spark on a real dry day. If you come right out of the shower, your hair is all wet, you won't. And here's pretty much, you're going to see Ron Zizulka right here, the mad scientist of static electricity. Ron lives in Saskatchewan, Canada, and he goes bear hunting with a bow and arrow. As we know that, as I mentioned, when you have something that's dry, like your hair, and you put a brush through it, you may get some sparking. You feel some of that. If you wet it, you don't. And what Ron was showing was when you take a balloon and you rub it on a surface, you're creating some static electricity. You could stick it on a wall. Once you take that same balloon and you put some water on it, it will not stick. So showing how humidity, the moisture, can reduce static electricity. So let's take a look at relative humidity and how important that is. So walking on a carpet, relative humidity below 25%, which is pretty low, fairly dry, can generate, say, 30,000 volts. But look at the dramatic difference when things get a little moist, about 1,500 volts. Rubbing plastic bags, a lot of plastic at propane plants. Below 25% relative humidity, 20,000 volts, above 50%. So it's important to be mindful of where the range of relative humidity is and be extra cautious about some of the issues and some of the areas that can cause static electricity. So it can never be eliminated. We're always going to have some type of static electricity in the air. The issue is, how do we control that static electricity? So let's take a look at some static control areas. And hopefully, Bill, please let me know if we can hear this or not. I'll go through it and certainly get the idea, even if you can't hear it. All right, so this is going here, just showing, where is propane being released in a facility? Transfer of propane, storage. We can refer to these things. We can consider these areas static control areas. Okay? And various prevention measures need to be taken. As you can see, safety air to turn off the cell phones. We want to make sure that if we're pumping propane into a customer's vehicle, we want people out of that area. We don't want them, right? We generate static electricity by moving back and forth, shuffling our feet. And what we want to do with the static stay footwear is it'll dispense that static charge before it could really build up. And that's what's critical. We're going to have it, but we're going to reduce that amount to the point where it cannot generate a spark. Okay? We want to make sure that we're wearing cotton materials, no synthetics, right? Okay. Okay, don't put on garments, don't take them off in a static control area. Make sure, like any good housekeeping, you kind of getting those plastics and some of those things that could be part of a spark out of the area. There's some topical anti-static coatings that you can use, and we always want to make sure that electrical equipment is properly grounded. Okay, but I think we get the idea. Now here's a picture where we've got a few things wrong. Can't tell here, this is a worker. He's wearing a wool sweater. He shouldn't. He's allowing somebody into what would be referred to as a static control area, an area that we know can generate vapors, and if there's a static spark, can be result in an ignition. We see over here, there's some plastic wrap, some other plastic items that can generate static electricity. We want to keep those things away. That's our static control area. Here's the meat, friends. What steps can you take to control static discharge in your plant? And in many ways, it's just like we were used to or familiar with separating hazardous materials from other hazardous materials, from incompatible materials. Kind of a similar situation of distancing, using distance as one means to reduce the risk. So, identify static control areas in your plants. Wherever transfer operations occur, it can bulkheads, cylinder filling areas, motor fuel areas, where cylinders are evacuated and disposed, wherever there's a transfer of product. Use visible barrier, like a sign, right? Keep that about 25 feet. Make sure that people know about 25 feet on, that's where your static control area is. Barriers recommended, 25 feet from points of transfer, and make sure that your equipment is bonded and grounded appropriately. So, electrostatic countermeasures maintain an increased level of awareness. When humidity drops below 50%, we talked about how humidity, low humidity, doesn't cause it, but can increase the chances of a static electricity ignition. Countermeasure 2, proper footwear. I did a session on personal protective equipment last month, and it can't be just any footwear. ASTM has specifically rated footwear that'll dissipate the electrostatic charge. Again, we want that eliminated and reduced to dissipate before it can build up. Anti-static mats, flooring, paints, all of those things. What they do is they dissipate the electrostatic charge so that a person can't throw the spark in an area where there's fuel, which could ultimately cause an ignition. And we know about grounding and bonding. Wear clothing that resists static electric buildup. Polyester, no nylons, no synthetic microfibers in a static control area. None. Why? They could generate a spark. Never remove clothing in a static control area. And again, keep that recommended 25-foot designated static-free zone for that static control area. Within that 25 feet, we don't want plastic wrap and things like that, or we want plastic pails around. We don't want people wearing nylon. We want people to be wearing a static safe footwear. Make sure you ground yourself first. You know, when you go gas up your car, what do? Right? You touch your car. I actually do that. You know, safety geeks really listen to that stuff. Right? It really matters. It does matter. You can build or charge exiting vehicles that are capable of igniting propane. Some of you might have seen a video of a woman in a gas station. She goes to gas her car up. She goes back into her car. Maybe it's cold outside. She comes back out. She touches the fuel pump. She ignites the fuel. Right? It's theorized that, well, while she was in her car and she came outside of her car, maybe she had one of those, velvet type of upholstery or something, that generated a spark. She carried the spark and threw that spark to the gas pump, which ignited the gasoline vapors. Look at your surroundings. Make sure keep customers away from any static discharge area. Okay, we can't eliminate it. It's going to be around us. We use some training. We talk to one another. We find out what's going on in the plant. We listen to see what's happening. We institute some of these issues, and we try to remove the risk as much as possible. Like I say, the good news about static electricity is that while it's all around us, like many things with propane, it needs that sweet spot, that roughly 2% to 9% air-gas mixture. Without that sweet spot, we're probably not going to have an ignition. So fortunately, it doesn't happen a lot. Fortunately, I hope that from this presentation, you realize, wow, I could do these things. It's not really that difficult to ensure that you're reducing the risk as much as possible to avoid a devastating consequence. And I would urge you, if you haven't already, To get the static electricity propane manual that PERC offers, it has a quiz. It walks you exactly through what you have to do. There's a great field evaluation guide. I like to think that it might have saved at least one plant from a static discharge incident. Friends, with that, that's my great grandfather. Let's give you some food for thought that we don't take these issues of static discharge for granted, even though we can't see it. That when it happens, it could be catastrophic, but it's relatively simple with some controls, some PPE, some administrative controls to reduce the risk and reduce the hazard. And that's really what we're all about. That concludes my presentation. Thank you so much. And if there are any questions, comments, I'm happy to take them. And anyone that wants to contact me afterwards, there's my information. Bill, back to you.
Yeah, Stuart, thanks a lot. And yeah, I'm glad to say that I don't have to worry about some of the static electricity from brushing my hair like that last guy had, right? So thanks for sharing, and thanks for going through that. I remember seeing a video, maybe some of you have seen it too, of a propane delivery driver on a security camera where he was filling a tank and a spark ignited, I think, his clothing, and the video shows him having to roll on the ground to put the fire out. If anybody has that, please let Stuart and I know. We'd love to add that to what we're trying to build here, which is a way to improve safety and improve overall operations. So, hey, Stuart, thanks for sharing. And what we have up today is a whole list, a whole crew of great presenters. And this is the homepage right here. If you're not sure how to get there, if somebody, I know that this is a new layout that we have, so it's a little hard for some people to navigate. So we added a button here that says click here for live presentations. And it's different colors on different pages to try to bring some attention to that. But when you click to it, it does bring you right into all the live presenters. And we of course try to make things a little bit easier and simpler for everyone. And essentially brings you right into the page and lets you click to join the live meetings. I know that everybody here understands it. The next one up is really a cutting edge new way of bringing attention to your company, whether it's a propane marketer or a vendor to the propane industry. This gentleman next up is Roger Rosenbaum. He's helped some of the smaller and largest propane companies in North America, and has done a lot throughout other industries too, using technology to help bring attention to brands, and in a more affordable way, and a digital way, which is really becoming the way to market and to get our word out, especially in this world of concern over potentially spreading a virus or whatever. So great lineup of presenters today. At 11 and then at noon, we have Jan Bray, who is an excellent speaker. I know that she's worked with many companies in our industry. Shane and Stuart could both speak to her. After that, we have Chad, who's an expert on mergers and acquisitions. He's going to be presenting on, what does it look like behind the scenes? He did acquisitions for Feral Gas, so some insights into how to increase the value of your company. After that becomes how to market in a new normal. So how to take the tools that you learn how to gain and build here, and then use them and leverage them in your marketing. And after that is how to make a heck of a lot more money in the propane industry, how to flatten the curve in propane, just some insights from leveraging some new technologies and some new ways to use that technology to increase profits. And then to close out the day, we have how to really leverage our customer service reps, and then a whole lineup for tomorrow. So this is going to be Paulina from EDP, EDP. And she's also worked in the associations in our industry. So she'll be bringing up the cleanup hitter, right? So Stuart, thanks again. And a little shout out to all of these guys. These are our platinum sponsors, and you can see them throughout here. So our platinum sponsors, want to say a thank you to them. Please visit their booths and the booths of all the vendors. These vendors are coming out with new things that you're not able to see at any expo, because there's no expos that are open right now. So there's new things that are coming out. A lot of people built some neat, cool ways to grow your business, to increase profits. And check them out on these in their Expo booths. You can, there's no sales pitches, really information you can gather and videos and really dig deep into what these companies provide without actually having to drive anywhere. So again, Stuart, thanks a lot for being on, and everyone will be closing out the meeting right now, and we'll be starting up again in just about 15 minutes. Thanks a lot. Thanks, Stuart.
Thank you, everyone.